Another example here that's sort of proto-emergent, somewhat simpler versions, this phenomenon of wisdom in the crowd. And this is one was first identified by Francis Galton, who was some relative of Darwin and started eugenics and was bad news in that regard, but famous statistician. And being an Englishman somewhere in the 19th century, he spent huge amounts of time going to state fairs and county fairs or whatever. And he was at this fair one day where they had some oxen up there, and they were having a contest that if you could guess the exact weight of the oxen, you would get to milk it or something. I don't know what the prize would be. And there were hundreds of farmers around filling out little pieces of paper where they were guessing, and what he discovered at the end was that nobody got the answer right. Good. So the owners of this get off easy without having to give up any of their oxen milk. But he then did something interesting. He collected all the little slips of paper, and he averaged all of them, and it came out to the correct weight within an ounce. In other words, no individual in that group had enough knowledge to be able to truly accurately tell what this thing was, but put them together in a crowd, and out comes the right answer. This is the notion behind a field called prediction markets, where what you do is you are trying to predict some event. For example, the Pentagon is very interested in using prediction markets to try to predict where the next terrorist attack might be. And what you do is you get a whole bunch of experts and you ask each of them to think about whatever the parameters are and take a guess as to how long it will be before the next one occurs. And what you do is you average them up and assume there's a wisdom of the crowd thing going on, and that will give you lots of information. Great case of this a few years ago. There was some submarine or something that sunk somewhere out in the Pacific in the ocean, and nobody knew where it was, but they kind of knew where the last sighting, the last recording was from it, whatever. They had a whole bunch of naval experts, and they had all of them sort of bone up on the knowledge of what was the water temperature and wind speeds and where they were in the last sighting and what was on TV that day or whatever. They got all the information, and each one made a guess as to where it would be on the map, and you put them all together, and they had guesses covering hundreds of square miles of ocean floor, and they put it all together, and they came up within 300 yards of the right location. So what we have over and over here is this business of put a lot of somewhat decent experts together on a problem, and they will be more accurate than almost any one single amazing expert at it, under a few conditions. The collection of these partial experts can't be biased, or if they are, they all have to be biased in a random scattering of directions. And they need to really do be somewhat expert. If you get a whole bunch of people off the subway in New York and ask them to guess the weight of the oxen, they are not going to wisdom of the crowd their way into being able to milk the thing afterwards. You got to have people who have some experience with it. And you wind up seeing wisdom of the crowd stuff going on in all sorts of living systems. For example, here is an ant colony, and here's a dead ant, and they're trying to get the dead ant back to the ant colony. And when you look at these things, they know how to get it, or they get some dead beetle or something to eat, and a whole bunch of ants push it over back to their colony. Oh, does each one of them know exactly where they should be pushing? No, what you have instead is each ant has somewhat of the right idea as to where they should be going, and there's more ants that have a reasonably accurate notion, a smaller number that are somewhat off, a really small number that are way out of whack, because in general, ants are kind of experts at finding ant colonies. They're pretty informed, and what you do is you put them all together and you do this vector geometry stuff, and it moves perfectly in that direction, and no single ant knows exactly where the colony is. You've got a wisdom of the crowd thing here going on. Okay, 5-minute break. If you have a chance, could you email me that website so we could post it in the Courseworks? It's great. Okay, picking up. So now we are ready to take some of those building blocks, wisdom of the crowd stuff, biophysical potato chips, and begin to see it more formally in this field of emergent complexity. What is that about? What we've already alluded to, it's systems where you have a very small number of rules for how very large numbers of simple participants interact. What's that about? Here's what emergence is about. You take an ant and you put it on a tabletop and you watch what it's doing, and it makes no sense whatsoever. You take 10 ants and do it, and none of them make any sense. You put 100 and they're all scattering around, and somewhere around, I don't know, 1,000 ants or so, they suddenly start making sense. And you put in 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever it is, and suddenly, instead of some little thing wandering around aimlessly, you suddenly have a colony that can grow fungi and regulate the temperature of the colony and all these things, and suddenly out of these ants emerges an incredibly complex adapted system, an adaptive one. And the critical point there is no single ant knows what the temperature should be in the colony, or if this is time to go out foraging in this direction instead of that direction. It all emerges out of the nature of ant interactions. You've got very simple constituent parts, an ant, much like one box that's filled in a cellular automata. You've got very simple rules for how they interact with each other. Ants have, I don't know, maybe 3.5 rules. Don't tell Deborah Gordon in the department, who's an ant obsessive, but that I may be inadvertently dissing the ants, but they have a small number of rules as to how they interact. If you bump into an ant and you do this with the pheromones, you go this way, and if you go that way, and I'm just making it up, they have a small number of rules, and as long as you got a lot of ants doing this, out of this can emerge hugely complex adaptive patterns. And this is what an emergent system is about. Simple players, huge numbers of them, simple nearest neighbor rules, and you throw them all together and out comes patterning, and there is no single ant that knows what the blueprint is, and there's no blueprint. There is no plan anywhere that says what the mature form of the colony should look like. There are no instructions. It is bottom-up organization rather than top-down.